The title of my talk is Messages from Ophiuchus, sometimes said as Ophiuchus, sometimes said as Oh fuck us. Is it time to take the 13th sign seriously? Well, hell no. That's it. Thank you. We're done here. It's a conference. You thought I was going to say something profound. Nah, just kidding. I got an agenda. There's the agenda. So you can see that we're going to talk about some different things related to Ophiuchus in myth and the heavens. The idea of a modern one is a 13th sign, a big bad deal, and then fuging Ophiuchus, a new way to see the 13th, the putative 13th sign. So this is the symbol that someone has made up related to Ophiuchus. I mean, it looks like that's a fuck you. Right? So it's right there. Yeah, I don't know where that symbol came from, what committee was responsible for that, but there it is. But let's talk about this. And yes, there's a lot of text there. I will read some of it. But I had to put this story up because, like many Greek myths, is Jason Holly here? Because he likes to talk about Greek. Okay. But like many Greek myths, this one was just so ratchet that I just had to give it in full detail. So one thing to know is that Ophiuchus is said to represent the shamanic healer Asclepius, son of the god Apollo and his mortal lover Coronis, the Thalassian princess. Now, again, I'm just going to give the highlights here. Supposedly, after impregnating the princess, Apollo leaves Coronis alone, right, to go perform some godly duties. Which, when you know these gods, it's just to like be fuckboys, right? Just to go do something and, and he entrusts a white raven to watch her. Well, Coronis actually had really strong interest in Ischus, who she knew and loved, and then a raven, she hooks up with him, and then a raven goes and snitches to Apollo. In a rage, Apollo decides, like, well, now you're going to be black, which, all right. So now we have ravens black, and only black. And then he whines and becomes like a bitch ass, and then goes to his twin sister, Artemis, Diana, goddess of the hunt, who in turn then, I guess as a favor to her brother, kills Coronis with her arrows. Isn't that foul? Wouldn't you agree that's kind of a foul thing? Wait. Don't you think that's okay? Thank you. I have to check in with John Morals then. But Apollo has the nerve to be actually sorry about all of this as Coronis is on a pyre, on her funeral pyre, and then he decides to cut the baby, remembering that there is a baby out of her, and then takes in the baby. I didn't know this part of the story. I just thought, she died, he took the baby under his wing. No, it's far more wretched than that. So he decides to share, because Apollo is a lot of different things. It's very interesting. Apollo is also a god related to the idea of the sun and having the power of the sun, but also of healing, of divination. We can get into a longer story about how the sun relates to the ninth house and divination and dreams. And so Apollo was all these things and a healer. So he, as a healer, took his son Asclepius under his wing and then left him again to go do some godly duties, and was raised more by Chiron, who is the wounded healer. And Asclepius, as you can read here, became a fantastic healer. And one time, as he was commissioned to resurrect a prince, as he was contemplating it, the snake kind of wound its way around his staff, and he killed it. But then another snake came along, and with some, right, I'm glad that was a good laugh. Another snake comes along and brings an herb and resurrects that snake. And so Asclepius learned how to resurrect the dead. And Zeus, well, actually, Hades, Pluto, being Pluto, whines to Zeus about it and say, like, you can't have this, he's just gonna actually empty out all of hell. And so Zeus kills Asclepius, and then he feels sorry about it a little later and makes an eternal tribute by putting Asclepius into the sky. So one thing to kind of resonate or see is that there's some confusion, and always some measure of confusion with Asclepius that goes beyond just the pale of whether he should be the 13th sign or not, including whether we're going to use the caduceus, which is also the staff of Hermes that you see on your left there, or to use the actual symbol for Asclepius, which is a single snake wound around the staff. Here's some other images, and some measures of confusion because it often comes from astronomers or people who love astronomy. What you're looking up at, over here, does everyone see my cursor? Okay. What you're looking at here is that Ophiuchus actually does appear on the imaginary orbit of the sun around the Earth, called the ecliptic. And so when astronomers see that, they think like, well, the astrologers are just stupid. They don't know that there's a 13th sign. Well, we'll clarify that in a second, but if you've wondered, and this is the same image, but it's just drawn, and this is from Astromythology by Valerie Vaughan, which is an excellent book. But you see here that, oh, by the way, I'm a Scorpio sun, so we have Ophiuchus stepping on the scorpion, but between the Sagittarius. So he does appear along the ecliptic. And going back to this image for a minute, I also just want to point out that you can see that Scorpio is about, right there, and Scorpius is only about 7 days long if we were just going with the literal position of the actual constellations. Ophiuchus, or Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, the constellation is also known as Serpentarius, I guess trying to copy out the Sagittarius. And its cusps will vary according to the source you use, which is from 24 Scorpio to 12 Capricorn, if you're using the tropical zodiac. The etymology of it is really literally Ophiuchus, which is serpent bearer or serpent holder. The constellation has 8 significant stars, but the most popular or the biggest star is Ras Al Hag. And the one thing I want you to keep in mind is the actual degree, 22 degrees, 27 minutes of Sagittarius. So that is going to come up at a significant point during this lecture, but that's one particular part. You can actually see the constellation culminating, rising in the midnight sky in the northern hemisphere during early June, so you can probably start seeing it next week. And in the southern hemisphere, you'll see it which is the same time in the winter. It does appear, as I said, along the ecliptic. One thing that I found interesting that I will come back to is that there are black holes very much near Ophiuchus's right leg and hand. And we can say, and this is kind of giving me a clue where I'm going, is that some measure of the designation of how we might start to think about Ophiuchus might relate to that black star of darkness and chaos. So is it a big bad deal? Well, as I said, astronomers seem to think it is, and they will often bring it up as to think that astrologers are too lazy to investigate how it actually, to know that we have known about Ophiuchus since the 2nd century and also about the precession of the equinoxes. So one of the things I want to mention to you that I think is interesting, one of the biggest iterations of this in the last decade in terms of folks, using Ophiuchus, is that it surfaced January 12th, 2011, and I have the time that the story first appeared, which is 7:14 a.m., and I'm using Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was actually, it could be another, but I'm gonna go with, this just says Minnesota here. And then there's another time where it also appeared, this is from Deb Holding, another time in January 20th, 1995, roughly around 9 p.m. in London, England. What's interesting about these stars is that, or these charts as well, are some parallels that seem to surface with them. And I'm just pointing this out because it does seem to go along with some dimensions of, what we talked about as the parameters of Ophiuchus. You notice Pluto just went into Sagittarius, in the inner wheel, and this first again happened in 1995. Jupiter's in Sagittarius, Venus is also in Sagittarius. And we also have Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn. What's fascinating is that, as a reiteration, is that Mars goes right on top of that Uranus, almost echoing some dimension of this iteration of Ophiuchus being used to malign astrologers and malign astrology. But I just thought it would be interesting to document how has this kept going, but also when did it first surface? Because even though it may come up every 3 or 4 years, and it actually even dates back earlier, but in the last, we could say during the time of the millennials, we could see that it surfaced in 1995 as one of the more documented times. So what that means is that typically your horoscope is wrong. And these are the dates that are often given. So I was just discovering and talking with someone at my table, we have the same birthday, November 22nd. And according to this, we're not even Scorpios. Here we were debating whether we're Scorpios or Sagittarius. All along, we were Libras. So, but these are the dates that are given. As I was doing research on this, I came across an interesting story, and maybe you've heard about it in the news. There's this man, I'm going to say his name, Tim Freed, as a modern Ophiuchus. And to know a little bit about his story, he's been a lifelong enthusiast of snakes. He began injecting himself with the poison or snake venom in 2000 after taking a venom extraction class. And then what's fascinating is on September 12th, 2001, dealing with the aftermath of 9/11 and also having lost a friend, a dear friend, a childhood friend that night, he actually was bitten by one cobra and was fine. But then he was bitten by another cobra accidentally and went into a comatose for a number of days, for 4 days. But he didn't stop. His wife rushed him in, his wife and kids rushed him to the hospital. He didn't stop, and then as you can see, he kept going with his studies related to his amateur studies. He's not someone who even completed high school. He injected himself with snake venom over 800 times and was bitten around 200 times. So he acquired a resistance that intrigued immunologist Jacob Glanville, and together they developed the beginnings of a snake antivenom that can help, cure people who have been bitten by this. Now, let's have some fun. What sign do you think he is? Seriously. Scorpio, what else? Aries, okay. Anyone else? Sagittarius? Oh, Ophiuchus? That's what I was hoping for. Leo? Okay. Anyone else? All right, I'll say it. Okay, well, I'll show the chart in a second, but I don't have his time, but I paid money. I did find his birth date. Oh, you can do that shit, right? So I was like, okay, I gotta know. I even wrote the man. I found the man. I wrote the man. And he didn't answer me. I wrote my best letter, email, but he didn't answer me. All right, I'll tell you. Where are the Aries folks? There you are. Of course he's a goddamn Aries. He's a double Aries. Here's his chart. Again, I just want to make the correction. We don't have a time. I'm not sure of his exact birth location either. I'm using Milwaukee, but the man has never moved from Wisconsin or being around Milwaukee. Like, how do you know that? Because I told you I paid money, and then I saw his whole address history. Now, you're like, okay, this is nice, Sam. All right, he's in Aries. This is fun. What's this got to do with anything astrological beyond this and Ophiuchus? Well, this is where you can use solar fire software, right? Oh, someone clap for solar fire, right? I know the Tempso has stolen the show, but solar fire. But I want you to notice something that I've already highlighted for you, is that in terms of culminating Russell Haig, the desire to heal a wound is heightened in his chart, as well as by virtue of his parents to Neptune, it also goes toward Russell Haig. So the idea of not only him literally allowing snakes to bite him and also injecting himself with venom, it's actually in his chart by parent. Now, I told you to remember the degree of Russell Haig, but we'll come to that in just a little bit. So is the 13th sign a big bad deal? No. Okay. There you go. No. Not so fast. This is where we probably have a nice opportunity to fugue Ophiuchus or Ophiuchus. And so the word fugue comes from Latin, fuga, means flight or run away. This relates to the idea of fleeing or chasing through with a theme. And it's also, how many of you are in music and have heard of a fugue, right? Okay, great. So there are ways in which you can use different voices in a musical fugue that kind of goes with a repeat of tonality. We also could say, and this is something I learned from psychology, a fugue state is a temporary disturbed state of consciousness characterized by a loss of memory and a tendency to wander. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of venture into an understanding of Ophiuchus that may put us in a different mindset every time we hear it, rather than thinking that we're about to break out. I'm not going to read everything that's on these slides, but I do want to emphasize that some aspects of it, one as a general theme, does deal with healing, does deal with snakes, and also I've been cautioned to give a trigger warning. We are going to have snakes featured in this slide. So if snakes wig you out, just cover your eyes. Okay, so I'm going to have that. But when we're talking about snakes, that's also something that deals with Ophiuchus. It is said by M. Zodiac, which is one of, I think, a great book, The Pillars of Destiny, the fixed stars in astrology. I would like to read something he does say toward the middle paragraph. It is said to give an inclination toward infectious diseases, drug addiction, as well as smoking and drinking too much. The star always indicates a danger of all kinds of poisoning. If well placed, it gives healing abilities, describing doctors and healers. One thing that Diana K. Rosenberg does in her book, The Secrets of the Ancient Skies, she talks about Ophiuchus as a shaman, as having the power to create or have alternate worlds of omens, portents, and prophecies. Then we could see that Ophiuchus, as I mentioned about Scorpio, is associated with healing, turmoil, death, and regeneration, for such are the principles of the neighboring sign Scorpio. This is from Valerie Vaughn's book. Some astrologers have interpreted the symbol of a man holding a serpent as humanity struggling with the raw power of nature. The serpent energy of Kundalini, the source of sexuality, the inner struggle of emotional turmoil, the intense potential power of healing, or the creative destructive force of nuclear energy, all themes associated with Scorpio. And then from Jeffrey Cornelius's book, the Star Lore book, An Essential Guide to the Night Sky, he says the struggle, says the poet Manilius in the 1st century, will last forever as they, the serpent holder and the serpent, wage it on level terms with equal powers. So we start to piece together a different sense in a way we can start to understand what we can have with the serpent holder, that there's toil, that there's struggle, that there's healing, there's definitely the sense of how we experience death and fear, all those things. And speaking of fear, this leads us to our fear of the number 13, and triskaidekaphobia is one of the manifestations of it. And this is partly because I think especially for astrologers, 13 is a prime number and it isn't easily divisible. So it's unruly, kind of like a snake. 13 people reportedly at the Last Supper for, the Last Supper of Christ. And I'm not going to read all of these, but you can see some interesting things that are both positive, I think, and some things that are challenging. 13 notches on the bison horn or the cornucopia for the Venus of La Selle, a 25,000-year-old limestone bas relief found in the southern part, southwestern part of France. And these can symbolize 13 lunar or menstrual cycles. And this particular Venus, we're calling it the Venus of La Selle, but she's also maybe representative of a goddess. And so there may be ways in which there's aspects of 13 that dive into a deeper sense of fear. I mean, the 13th card, the tarot card, or the Rider-Waite deck is associated with death, but not necessarily literally. We also have, like I said, the lunar cycles, where we might be also afraid in some dimension of the feminine or coming into power. Because we see this as, the bar mitzvah that happens for young boys going into the Jewish faith. Here's that trigger I told you about, snakes. Now, I'm curious, you don't have to say anything, both in terms of virtual land and here. When you see those snakes, what did you feel in your body, right? What kind of surfaced for you, right? It could be that primal fear I'm talking about. And then you can see it in the sky. This is the actual constellation without Ophiuchus. This is the serpent's constellation. So, if you felt fear, ophidiophobia, did you know that was a word, right? Ophidiophobia may affect 1/3 of the human population, but not necessarily at a clinical level, not that you have to be medicated at the sight of snakes, but you may have felt something just now when you saw those images. Snakes are also associated with wisdom, cunning, knowledge, healing, being a fierce protector, and regenerative abilities since they can molt or shed their skin. They also can go into the burrows of the earth, crawl on the ground, and scale high into trees. They can show up in unpredictable and unexpected places. But snakes are also associated with death dealing with their venom, deceit, secrets, destruction, cold-bloodedness, and stealth. The snake's most notable and enduring impression has come from the Bible and its participation in the fall of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And so this is from William Blake. I love this image. It's very powerful. Rather than just having a snake, like a naked Eve, like, hey, what's up, babe? But there's a different way in which we can talk about all of this. What's interesting is that a highly complex, diverse, and sacred universal symbol, the serpent has a unique place in the animal world. And one of the things I'm going to emphasize, living underground, the serpent is in touch with the omniscience and magic possessed by the dead, the aggressive powers of the dark underworld. As the master of the bowels of the earth, it represents the dark forces of mankind. It's thus the enemy of the sun and the powers of light. I don't think that has to just be true, but that's often how we describe it. So why does it bother us so much when we say, there you go. The annoying hiss is like, so this, someone heard something, but for those who are back in virtual land, we have to change the software. What? I did mention the word basic. The annoying hisses from astronomers who neither understand our work nor want to do so, in turn deceive a public who don't know better. But what's also true that within years after Ophiuchus dust up, astrology goes through another glow up, like being on the cover of Life magazine in July 1997. So remember what I said to you. I said that in 1995 in London, we first had the story that circulates around the world the very next day, where people saying astrologers got it wrong, there are 13 signs. And then 2 years later, we're on the cover of Life magazine. Or astrology surged since 2011. This conference, for instance, has been in existence for 41 years, but just think how it's grown even since 2011. We'll give it to Laura. So there's an opportunity for us. Maybe every time that we see that Ophiuchus is in the news or surfaces, it's like, astrology's about to go for another surge. I better get out, dust off my business cards, right? It might be a time where we can step more into our power. But I think there's something deeper. I think it messes with our worldview as astrologers. It subverts the neatly packaged world of conformity, uniformity, and order. We somehow like that there's just 12. A 13th sign signals nothing but noise and chaos, like those black holes I talked about flanking some side of Ophiuchus. We would much rather be rid of the snake that Ophiuchus holds than recognize what the snake is or could be. I'm going to sound hokey here, but you'll have to cope with it. It could be love. And what I mean by that, last year when I gave my talk about Mars, I mentioned some part of this quote from Rumi. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to mention some part of it. And since I'm now giving you the whole poem, maybe it helps. Both light and shadow are the dance of love. Love has no cause. It is the astrolabe of God's secrets. Lover and loving are inseparable and timeless. And that brings me to talking about holding the snake. Perhaps at the heart of what we want to know with Ophiuchus is to have genuine love for the beast within ourselves. But that beast is really the nature of desire, of yearning to express itself and find love, protect love, honor love, and fully embrace, even as it is wildly dangerous and mysterious. It is the snake that which we must all toil and wrestle. Ophiuchus is how you hold on to your love and know it as yourself, and at the same time that it's not. It doesn't matter that it's through a zodiac of 12 or 13. In dealing with this sense of love, first in chaos, it's dealing with that, acknowledging chaos. And what may disturb astrologers when somehow we get news about Ophiuchus is that we feel the chaos that we want to contain. As Bernadette Brady says in her book, Brady's Book of Fixed Stars, when it appears in your chart, the stars suggest you are drawn to the healing. You're drawn to the healing profession or have a natural gift in that area. What you choose to heal may not be only living things or beings, but also living ideals. It may be a time to call us back to our ideals rather than our fears. In other words, we might be talking about Ophiuchus as an occupational via combusta for astrology. And some people are like, what's a via combusta? The burning way. In horary, when you actually are observing a planet or a point between 15 degrees Libra to 15 degrees Scorpio, it's said to kind of be in some measure of distress. And maybe it is a point of distress. Maybe it's something like a vocational Mercury retrograde for us when we experience some measure of the hype related to Ophiuchus. Okay, I have another trigger warning. This is involving TDS or ODS. What do you think TDS is for? You guys know. Trump derangement syndrome. You might remember I used this picture last year when I talked about life on Mars. I just like having the man orange. But I want to point something out to you. Look at his south node and moon. What did I tell you about Ras Al-Heg? Right? Oh, yeah, you're like, I can't see it. Move the caption, Sam. That's my whole life. Okay. So you can see his moon is conjoined to Ras Al-Heg. And let me show you here. And you're like, well, how does this relate to healing a wound? Right? Is he our Ophiuchus? Or just our Ophiuchus? Son of a cobra. Maybe that's a new name for him. Look at that, son of a cobra. I like it. But there may be something deeper here to contemplate related to that. Because just to be clear, as I mentioned, Ras Al Hayy is actually at the head of Ophiuchus. And even though the simple explanation given is that it's a desire to heal the wound, and also it comes with it, but it may be an opportunity for us to contend with wounds. And so here we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to treat Ophiuchus as a sign, but not just as a zodiac sign. It could be a sign for us to heal ourselves and wrestle with chaos, and for US citizens to remember our ophitic past and avoid it. To remember that Ophiuchus, or Ophiuchus, is a serpent holder, a wrestler, and charmer. His destiny is to toil with that snake. So when astronomers and skeptics surface with hisses about Ophiuchus, it's hard to contend with the trouble and toil they stir for no other reason than their own self-smug sense of satisfaction. It's equally hard to leave a place like Norwalk, where everyone speaks your language, everyone knows your name, or can remember your big three or more and venture into a world that thinks what you do is weird or condescendingly cute or interesting. It's beyond difficult for many of us to contend with the erasures of the progress, identities, civil liberties, security, or even livelihood that we and those before us have struggled to obtain. But toil we must. It's easy to succumb to the bites and venom that daily threaten so much of our lives and livelihood as individuals and collectively as astrologers, but endure and fight we must. Our vocational ancestors endured as much, if not more. Those who were burned at the stake and had their heads cut off, or banished from their homelands, or put under house arrest. It hasn't been easy or to be long-lived or much less prosperous for astrologers in almost all of our history. But we're still here and we're still strong. In fact, if the surfacing of Ophiuchus from time to time illustrates anything, as I've said, it is that we must embrace the chaotic mystery and majesty of the 13th sign, even as we live and practice the order and structure of the 12 zodiac. We cannot become too precious with our annoyances and smug ourselves with the symmetry of our art that we forget its scaly head that sometimes bites the hand that feeds it. You know, when you get a prediction wrong. Its wily body that we all strive to manage or even control sometimes. And that rattle of its tail that alerts us of disaster only after it's struck. Let's be honest. We are often as charmed by the slippery serpentine nature of the craft, even as we strive to charm it for ourselves or others, whether for our own delight or someone else's. It's easy to lose sight of the struggle and the toil. So when Ophiuchus surfaces in the media, or we wake up to panicked emails or calls from our clients who read that their zodiac sign has changed, we rail at Asclepius' eternal tribute to his own martyrdom, rather than heeding the reminder that we are healers and not yet healed, or free of the struggle of healing or facing the venom of others. There is a reason that Chiron, the wounded healer, was one of Asclepius' most illustrious teachers. And we are reminded of other reasons. There's a reason that right now you are in the seat that you're in, whether via Zoom or here on this land of the Squamish and the Duwamish indigenous people who could call their home once their home without infringement. There is a reason why your ancestors carried the seed of you in their bodies for generations before an assemblage of stars heralded your birth. There's a reason why you were born during this very tempestuous time. But as Stormy Grace told us and reminded us during the beginning of our 2025 journey, we are not in competition. We are in constellation. And believe it or not, there's room for Ophiuchus too as a sign, just not as a zodiac one. That doesn't diminish its message for us, or any of us. Like Asclepius, Ophiuchus, we are healers and space holders. And that's what we were born to do, even if we're reminded of that by snarky, contempt addict skeptics or snakes. Let them hiss, we will rise regardless. Thank you.